Hey everyone, Adrian here. Welcome to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mark Moss. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, Adrian, happy to be here.
It's great to have you. I've been really interested in a lot of your work. We're going to be talking a lot about finance and bits and pieces about what's going on around the world, which is why I'm so curious to get your take on it because you've got a really um, great perspective on life, which is from my messaging, the way I interpret your information that you put out there is like the world is not the way that we think it is. And the last couple of years has shown us exactly what has been going on to prove to us that we think that we're in control of what's going on in our lives, our finances, and things like that. But in a moment's notice, the government and the powers that be can kind of rip that away from you. And that's in my life has happened twice. And I'm only 45 years old. So I think in a short period of time, I've seen collapses in economies and businesses broken and destroyed and livelihoods taken away from people. And I like your message. You're almost saying, get yourself intelligent enough, get that financial intelligence up to speed. So you've kind of got like, fuck you money, that if this shit does get pulled again, you've got some options other than depending on the government to support what your livelihood and how you survive, and now you're under their control. Is that the kind of right interpretation of your position?
Well, I don't know about the whole get the FU money part. I mean, obviously that's a big goal for everybody, but I don't know if most people ever achieve that. But I think to the kind of other point that you're making, which is yes, take as many things under your control as you possibly can. Something I've been talking about quite a bit is sort of like I talk about these cycles quite a bit and how this like this pendulum that swings back and forth and where it swings from centralization to decentralization. There's three big cycles I talk about: financial revolution cycles, political revolution cycles, and technological revolution cycles. And they're converging right now, but there's like this pendulum that swings back and forth. And one of the things that we're seeing is sort of like this fourth turning event happening, and part of it is like in human nature, we take things too far. And because we take them too far, then we go back the other way, but then we take them too far again. So then we go back the other way and we take it too far again. So it's sort of with this pendulum swings back and forth. And the way that I've been sort of describing it is in financial markets, we have these things called blow off tops. So if you look at Bitcoin in 2017 or Bitcoin in 2021, you'll see it goes up, and then and it crashes down. Why do market cycles have these blow off tops? Because what happens is as we go into these parabolic runs, it starts sucking in more people, more people, more people. Oh, I want to get rich too. I want to get rich. It starts sucking everybody in. But markets stop going up when there's no more buyers. So all of a sudden the market starts running out. It's pulled in Bitcoin in 2017. It pulled in as many buyers as it could in that cycle. It starts to get volatile and then it crashes down. All right. And I've been calling it the blow off top of socialism or the blow off top of centralization, if you will, but really the blow off top of socialism. So what do I mean by that? What we've seen, and to the point that you're asking, we should be trying to take advantage or take responsibility for as many things as we can in our own lives. However, what's happened over the last 80 years is that we have not, and we've given more and more and more to the government to take over for us. So, hey, government, raise my kids for me. Hey, government, give me a pension. Hey, government, take care of my health care. Hey, government, take care of my security, take care of my roads, you name it. We've given all of our responsibility to the government. And so that's socialism, right? So the government's gotten bigger, 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 bigger. But the problem is there's not much more we can give over to the government. Right. So markets stop going up when there's no more buyers. And now we're starting to see the volatility at the top where people are starting to realize that they've given way too much control over to the government. The government and the central planners do not have their best interests in heart and in mind. And now we're starting to see the volatility of that. And I believe there will be a big blow off top where everybody realized like, oh, shoot, this was a big mistake. We never should have abdicated that much responsibility. And it's time for us to now take responsibility for ourselves, learn about my own health, learn about my own fitness, learn about my own relationships, learn about my own money, and then control my future from there.
Yeah. And hey, that's just been the topic of conversation for the last couple of years. I think more and more people that I talk to, they are looking at all aspects of their life, not only just taking control of their finances, but like you said, their health, their relationships. They're sort of pulling things into check that maybe in the past they were kind of just buried by the thick of thin things, as Stephen Covey would say. You're just sort of going along, doing the things that you normally would do every single day, going with the motions. And then all of a sudden, back in 2020, 21, when our businesses were shut down and everyone was confined to their homes, I think people started to realize that there's a lot they have acquiesced, as you said, to the governments and become really dependent, but also becoming sort of like this tunnel vision of I'm just going to work, and I'm making a wage and I'm paying the bills, and I'm not really considering anything else in terms of a long-term future. Is that the kind of sentiment that you've been getting since you've been on this path of like getting people to become more independent?
Well, I mean, you can certainly see people waking up to that, to the point that you're making this, and specifically, over the last couple of years, we've really seen this big shift. But yes, of course, that's exactly what I'm saying, right? We've continued to just give more and more of our responsibility away, and unfortunately, when you give up, when you abdicate that responsibility, tyranny will step in. Fine, you don't want it? I'll take care of your education. Sure, I'll educate your kids. Sure, let me take care of your money and your pension. Sure, so like, unfortunately, for most of us, and this is really where we get this sort of big divide in civilization, is that, like, for most of us, we just want to just, as you said, kind of work, take care of our families, and just like live our lives. Most of us just want that. We don't want to be involved in politics. We don't want to tell people what to do. We just like, let me just do me, you do you, sort of thing. But the problem is, when we do that, then the people who shouldn't have the power step in, like I said, to fill that void, and they take control. So certainly that's what's happening. That's, like I said, framing up this blow off top. But yes, to your point, I would agree. More and more people are waking up to it because we've seen that damage. And like I said, it's sort of like that pendulum where all of a sudden we've taken it too far. We're starting to see that. Now, unfortunately, not everybody's waking up to that. The majority of people still are. Surprisingly, a lot of people think that more government is the answer. They're like, oh, maybe I haven't given enough to the government. Like, when you have nothing left to give, maybe I just haven't given enough. Maybe it's because I think for myself. Maybe if I don't think for myself or whatever. I don't really know. I don't really understand that, but I do understand the fact that, honestly, we should be involved in more of our lives, and specifically things even more relating to what has power over our lives, like our local school boards, like our education systems, like our local governments. We should be involved in that. Over the last couple of months, I've been starting to think about this more and more, and like, maybe I should be involved in like my city council or my mayor or my county. But I don't want that. I don't want it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want the time commitment that's required from that. I don't want the stress to put my family through. I don't want any of that. But like, if I don't and somebody else good doesn't, then who does? And it's the people that we don't want to do it are the ones that do it. And when you look at, I was listening to this interview with Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about how, in Canada, they're going after his license now. And they said he has to go through like this re-education system. And he was saying, look, it's not too far gone, though. When you look at, and I've seen the same, when you look at these situations in your city council votes or your county votes, it usually comes down to like 1 or 2 votes. And he's like, look, in this college that's trying to do this to me, it's like one person there. It's one person making all this noise. He said, all we need is 1 or 2 people to stand up to this. We're not too far gone. It's not like 99% are against the one. No, it's like the one noisy person. And so when I look at, like I said, my school board meetings and my votes in my city council, it usually comes down to 1 vote. And if one person would just stand up to sway that vote, the cliche saying is that all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. But that's exactly what we're talking about. When you decide to do nothing, someone else is going to do something about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an interesting point, because I'd imagine in your position, people would come to you and go, "Hey, Mark, like, you're doing all these great things. You're singing from the same hymn book as me. You're more of a leader. You're a better speaker. Why don't you get involved?" And I've heard Jordan Peterson say things to that nature. I think people need to get more involved, but he doesn't. Like, well, not that I know of. My knowledge is that he doesn't really get involved in a lot of politics, and I think that. I've always had the sentiment that if our politicians ran the country like we have to run our businesses, then I think that country would be in a different position, because they wouldn't be spending so frivolously and wasting so much money and running the country in deficit for such a long time. So how do you balance that? I mean, there's a mindset involved in things. You need to take control of your own sovereignty, but at the same time, what you're also talking about is having involvement in decision-making processes that affect everyone else. So that's that's a unique perspective in the sense that it does require people like you and me and people that want to get community involved. But again, we're in this trap of like, I just got to take care of myself though. Like there's an element of self-preservation that I just need to take care of myself and my family. How do you balance that kind of
Well,
notion?
that's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm not in politics. I'm not doing any of that. So that's how I balance it. And so I think through my content that I create, my business coaching, my investment coaching stuff that I do it all from a sense of here's what I'm doing, here's what I've done, or here's what I'm doing, and I can show you how to do what I've done or what I'm doing. And so I'm not like, we have a lot of fake gurus, especially these days online, a bunch of 20-year-old kids telling you how to be the best salesman or the best investor. It's like, dude, you're 25 years old. What do you know, right?
Yeah.
But like, I only talk about what I have done or what I'm doing. And so I think really that's sort of like this big difference between different sides of the aisle in a sense where most people, maybe I hate to use labels like this, but potentially on the, conservative, as they might say, right, really are the ones taking care of their health, their fitness, their families, things like that, and like living by example.
Mm.
Whereas the other side of the political aisle wants to tell you what to do. I was asked one time at a conference, someone had brought their wife and they weren't really bought into the whole kind of freedom Bitcoin thesis. And she said, how do you know you're on the right side though? How do you know your views are right? And I had never been asked that before. And I thought about that for a while. And I came to the realization, and I told her, I said, the reason why I believe I'm on the right side is because I believe in freedom and I believe in me doing me and you doing you. The other side wants to tell me what I have to do. And I believe that's always wrong. And
Mm.
so to the point that you're asking, the question that you're asking, I believe in leading by example. Let me take care of myself. Let me take care of my family. Let me take care of my extended family and friends. And then it kind of radiates out from there. And hopefully my life could be an example that other people would want to emulate. And we sort of stimulate this change from the ground up. It's a decentralized change versus a central planning model, which is let me go acquire power so I can go tell a bunch of people what to do. Yeah. It's sort of the difference of, I'm getting millions of views a month across my platforms, and I'm happy to have influence. If you like what I'm doing with my own life and it's influenced you to make a positive change in your life, I'm happy to have influence, but I do not want any power over your life. I want no power. I want no control. I don't want any ability to legislate or have any type of way to control what you do. But if you like what I'm talking about and you like what you've seen me model in my life and you have and that influences you, then great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what gravitates me towards your training, is because you're about empowerment. You're about empowering others with information. So I'm totally on board with all of that. Can I ask you, Mark, what was the catalyst for you to navigating your way through this monetary system? Because a lot of it, from my point of view, is broken, but also it is the looming. I really want to talk into digital currencies eventually, but in the meantime, we're kind of shifting between cash and digital currency, and then business and the landscape of finance has changed. How have you navigated that? Because a lot of the people that were listening to this in my audience are just average mums and dads with kids trying to get ahead in life. Like, they are really sort of burning the candle at both ends in terms of trying to make ends meet, but at the same time trying to look for an avenue out, as in escaping the system, so to speak. Can we talk to that a little bit?
How they can do that, or what my motivation, what my motivation has been.
I am interested in your mindset and motivation, because I think the tone
So
from
my
my
so my motivation and mindset is different than a lot of other people's, and I don't know why. My parents raised me to think outside the box. I was homeschooled for quite a bit of time when I was young. I had to work when I was really young with my dad. I had to mow lawns in my neighborhood. All of these things, help make me who I am today. But, for me, I've only ever had one job in my whole life. I've never filled out a resume. I've never filled out a job application ever. I had a job when I was in high school. It's the only job I've ever had. And I didn't fill out anything because it was my friend's dad's company. And so my whole thought process for my whole life has been, how do I go make money? I've never thought who will give me a job and pay me money. Never thought that. My thought is, how do I go make money? And so it's just it's a flip of mindset, right? And how do we make money? Well, I learned very, very young at an early age how we make money. So I wanted a bike. True story. My parents didn't want to buy me the bike that I wanted. It was expensive. So I needed to make money. Now, I was probably 10 or 11 years old at the time. What skills did I have as a 10 or 11-year-old? I knew how to mow a lawn. Turns out my dad had a lawnmower in the garage. That was my skill. What was my market? My market was my neighborhood, as far as I could walk. So I took my skill to my market. I provided value and they paid me. And I had a lawn mowing route and I made money. And my whole life has been that exact process. I need to acquire higher value skills and take them to a bigger market. And I've been able to constantly increase my income by doing that, learning new skills, taking those skills and applying them to a bigger market. And my skills over my life from being 10 years old mowing a lawn till today are very broad. I can do a lot of things right now. Right? I've built dozens of businesses. I've had multiple high value exits. I've been in media business, coaching, all these different things. And so now I have all these skills that I can take. And so I think, one, that's my mindset. Now, what could average people do to sort of do something similar? Well, they would do the same thing, right? I built my whole career off a concept that success leaves clues. So you find somebody else who has success that you'd like to have, and then you reverse engineer the things that they've done to get there, and then you do the same things and you have about the same results. Now, what most people get wrong about this is they're going to look at somebody and say, oh, look at Mark. He's getting millions of views online and he has all these clients. I want that as well. So I'm going to do the same things that Mark is doing. But they're getting that wrong. They need to do the same things I did. So they can't do, so for example, like I look at other people bigger than me. So let's say like Patrick Bet David on YouTube. Well, I want the same show as Patrick Bet David. Well, I can't do the same things that he's doing today because I'm not at the same place he is. I have to do what he was doing 5 years ago. Right. Does that make sense? So I think that's what most people get wrong. They go, "Ooh, I like what that guy's doing. I want to make $1 million. How do I go make $1 million like that guy?" Well, the answer is you have to make $1 first. That's the answer. And so the goal is to find people who have success, but reverse engineer their process and do the same thing. So, for example, if I wanted to be I've used this example. It's not, doesn't fit so well anymore, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was like so buff, Mr. Olympia, right? If I wanted to be like Mr. Olympia, I would have had to do the same workouts and eat the same diet as he did. I wouldn't do it today. I'd have to see what he started when he was like 15 years old. Right. And so anyway, that's how people would do it. Now, if I reverse engineer what I did, I sort of already broke this down, but I think about it like this. You get paid for the value you provide to the world, not for working hard. And that's a big misconception. You can be the hardest working ditch digger in the world. You can go dig more holes faster than anybody in the middle of the desert, but that's not a value to anybody. So it's not about hard work. You have to provide value. So what do I mean by that? If you're working at a fast food restaurant and you're taking somebody's order, you're providing value to one single person placing an order, and that person would probably rather just put their order in an iPad on their own without you even being there. So you're not really providing much value. Now, those people, in my opinion, they're going to say that, oh, my employer won't increase my wages. They're greedy. I would say, no, you're greedy because you're not increasing any value you're adding and you're asking for more money. So what would I say to that person that's making a lower wage? I would say you need to learn how to go provide more value. Now, most of us are in these low paying skills and we're making low income. And this is a harsh reality for some people. But if you want to make more money, then maybe you need to go learn a new skill that you can provide more value. And let me give you an example. So let's just say hypothetically, you invented the personal computer. Nobody had a computer before, and you invented the personal computer, and you got one out to the entire world. Turns out that's worth a lot of money, and you become the richest man in the world. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say that you're a brain surgeon. I mean, dude, you're like super highly skilled. You're super leveraged. You're making like $1,000 an hour. You're saving someone's life, but it's only one person, right? So you need a high value skill that you can apply to the most amount of people. Higher the level skill, more people, the more income. So if you find yourself to be one of these people going, man, how do I get ahead? I'm burning the candle at both ends to the point that you made. I'm working super hard. I don't know how to get ahead. Well, it starts with making income, right? So a lot of people in my world, because I talk about investing, get this wrong. They come in and they want to invest their way to wealth. but that's not how it works. The best investors in the world, like Warren Buffett, still goes to work every day at a company, at a business. His business is called Berkshire Hathaway. It's worth about 700 billion. He's worth about 100 billion. His business that he works at every day, Ray Dalio, you know Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio, largest hedge fund in the world, went to work at a business every day called Bridgewater Capital. So you don't invest your way to wealth. You have to earn your way to wealth from business first. Then the money that you've created and saved then becomes an investment. So that's one big misconception. So you have to take, like I said, take an honest assessment. What skills do I have, or what skills do I need to go acquire? Now, the next question you might ask me, if you want, I can stop here, I can answer it. But the next question you might ask is, what are those high value skills that would make me a lot of money?
Yeah, for sure. Look, and I think this is a really key distinction, because there's a stumbling block with a lot of people to go, I only know one thing. And they're limited in their thinking in terms of, I don't have any other skills to develop or to cultivate in any way. And how do I monetize those skills? Is that some of the pushback that you get from your audience, or do you think that people gravitate towards you that are already on that investment strategy? Because I know a few investors that have kind of just invested in property and done pretty well for themselves, but they still work for a living, and they still have to pay that money into the investments all the time. They've not necessarily attained that freedom. And I think a lot of people that would gravitate to your work and like the work of others that you mentioned, is that they really want to get that freedom. But I think what you're saying is, the perception is that these guys sit on a beach all day and don't do anything and just watch their cash roll in, but they really are working quite hard at developing skills and knowledge, and then turning that knowledge into an asset, so to speak, in terms of an investment.
Yeah, let me break the formula down for you. So first of all, you have to understand that everything in life has a cost. Everything has a trade-off. Everything has a cost-benefit analysis to it. You might hear the climate alarmists talking about how fossil fuels are going to destroy the world. That might be the bad side of it, but what about the good side of it? They don't talk about that, right? So everything has a cost-benefit analysis. You have to be intellectually honest about that. So what do I mean by that? If you want to make $1 million, there's a cost. The cost is the amount of time and effort and energy you're going to put into that. So everybody wants to be Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, the richest guy in the world, but he worked 80 hours a week for 20 years straight. I don't want to do that. I ain't going to work 80 hours a week for 20 years. No way. So like, I'm not willing to pay what he paid to get there. So first thing you have to do is understand that. Now, some people might say, well, I would like to have whatever your number is, $100,000 a year of passive income coming in. I would like to have that. That's my dream. My dream is that I could go be the guy on the beach you talk about, and every month 10 grand just shows up in my bank account like magic, because I have this 100 grand a month. Okay, that's your dream. But what cost are you willing to pay for that? Now, if you don't, and this is where most people get this wrong, they say, well, I don't want to pay that. Well, then if you're not willing to pay that price to get that, then the cost is the dream. You either sacrifice now for your dream, or your dream becomes the sacrifice. So either way, it's going to cost you. You have to decide which one you want to pay. Now, let me give you the formula. So here's how it works. What most people have completely wrong, and I think the education system and actually Wall Street has perpetuated this lie, is that you should go to school, get a good grades, get a good job, and save for retirement. Okay, that's a lie. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for a bunch of reasons. One, I can tell you factually it doesn't work, because in the United States, half of the baby boomers today retiring have no savings. So it didn't work. That's fact. Two, it doesn't work because most people don't, but let's just say you saved 10% of your income. How does math work where you could save 10% of your income for 30 or 40 years, and then you could retire for 30 or 40 years and on like 90%? Like, how does that math work? Like, you don't have to be past elementary grade math to realize that that doesn't work. And then ultimately it doesn't work because we as people, as humans, we need cash flow. We don't want to live off savings. We want to live off income. So most of us know this. We just haven't thought about it. So hopefully you have savings. Hopefully you do. You need to have savings. If you don't have savings, you're a slave. You can't quit your job because you need the money, right? If you have savings, then you have options. So you should have some savings. Now, if you were to lose your job, then you can draw off your savings for a little bit. But your goal is to get a new income as fast as you can because you don't want to draw your savings down. So why would it make sense for me to save my whole life and then live off my savings? So what most people have wrong about this, and this is why Wall Street wants you to do this, because they want you paying in to the Wall Street fund. They want your money for 40 years before you take it back, right? That's why they perpetuate this. But the reality is we don't need, and it's this daunting number for you to retire. You're going to need whatever, $4 million. And that number is so big. How am I ever going to get to $4 million? I won't even bother, or I'll get later. No, you don't need $4 million. You don't need $4 million. What you need is 10 grand a month, and 10 grand a month, much easier to get than $4 million. And so most of us could get 10 grand a month within about 5 years if we focused on that. So here's how it works. Let me break this down for you. And anybody listening, write this down. The first thing you have to do is figure out what is the minimum amount of cash flow I need, the minimum. So what is the minimum so I don't end up on the street? What's my rent or my house payment, my electricity payment, my car payment? Like, what's the minimum? What is that? 3,700 a month, 4,700 a month, 27,000 a month, whatever that number is. And then I like to think of what's my ideal number. Well, in my ideal lifestyle, I would like to take 2 vacations a year. I want 10 grand for those. My ideal lifestyles, I want a $5,000 a month payment for my house. My ideal lifestyles, I want a brand new car. It's $1,000 a month payment. So my minimum number is 3,500. My ideal number is 15,000, whatever those numbers are for you. Okay. But let's start with the minimum number. So I need 5 grand a month. Great. So how do I get the 5 grand a month? I have to have assets that pay me that. Now, typically you can go buy right now, you can go buy US treasuries that pay you about 5%. You can buy, dividend paying stocks. You can buy real estate. You have all these different options that pay you, but let's just use the US treasuries. They're paying a lot of money right now, 5%. So if I wanted 50 grand a year of passive income at 5%, I'm going to need $1 million. That's how much it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
Okay. But that even sounds daunting, right? So I don't need $1 million. I need the 5 grand, but I could work my way up to it. Could I get 5 grand today that can get me like $300 a month? Yeah, you probably could. So I could take 5 grand and buy, things. You're in Australia, things are probably a little bit different down there. But here in the US, I could go buy like an $80,000 home. I could put 10% down. That's $8,000. That's going to pay me $300 to $500 a month. Now I don't need that money because I'm working. So that money now is compounding. It goes into a bank account every month. Now at that rate, in a year, that's going to be, call it 5 grand. So it takes a year and a half. I get my 8,000 back. So in a year and a half, I can buy a second home. Now I have 2 homes paying. So now I don't need a year and a half. Now it takes me 9 months. I get a 3rd home. Now it takes me 4 months to get a 4th home. Now it takes me 2 months to get the 5th home. Now it takes me 1 month to get the 6th home. Now it takes me 15 days to get the 7th home. You get the point.
Yeah.
And within 6 or 7 years, with a one-time payment of $8,000, within 6 or 7 years of compounding, I've now achieved that number that I need of the $10,000. Now, that's the basic math, but let me show you how you can adjust this. So these are variables. The variables are 1, the amount of income I'm able to put in, and 2, the rate of return that I'm earning. Those are my variables. Or 3, the amount of time I want to take. So if I'm okay with 7 years, great. I'll make the 5%. I'll put the 8 grand in. What if I want it to be in 5 years? Well, then either the amount of money I put in or the rate of return has to change. Or what if I'm okay waiting 20 years? Then I'll put 3 grand in, right? So those are the 3 variables: the time it takes, the amount of capital I have, and the rate of return. Now, the time it takes is, if you start sooner, great. That one isn't variable for everybody. Some people have just, hey, I need the money in 5 years. The rate of return, sure, I can go from treasuries. I could start fixing and flipping homes. I could start buying private equity. I could go into businesses. I could adjust the rate of return. But one of the easiest ways is we could change the amount of money we put in. That's in our control. Most of us can increase our income. Most of us can start a side hustle. Most of us can start a new business. Most of us can get a pay raise. So anyway, that's sort of the math and the levers there.
Yeah, I like it. There's one to circle back. You mentioned a few things about some industries and times changing where, for example, an environmental factor could be a detrimental thing on one side, but also could be a positive on the other side. We're at quite a precipice in time where we've got this digital currency, coming in quite hot in terms of changing the landscape of how we do finances. But then we've also got an environmental impact. We've also got governmental things that are changing on a regular basis. And we've got this thing, which is AI, which is threatening a lot of people's livelihoods in the way that they do business and work and things like that as well. What's your take on that? I mean, there have been examples throughout the years of people owning, I don't know, 100 horses, for example, and then the car gets invented the next day and they lose. Now, anyone who was in the CD or the vinyl business, vinyl record, and then CDs come out, and the vinyl guy lost. There's changes in times that have been detrimental to some people, but then they've provided more opportunities on the flip side. Where do you see that going in terms of this AI integration and people's in the economy and people's skill sets being repurposed, redeveloped, or however you want to put it?
Well, there's sort of a lot to unpack there. First of all, I agree with your assumption, right? So certainly history is full of these examples. It's called creative destruction. When a new way is created, it destroys the old way. And so one of the earliest examples I go back to in reference usually is what's known as the Luddites. The Luddites were a group of people back in the early days before the Industrial Revolution that were weavers. They made, tapestries and things like that. And the power loom was invented that allowed them to weave and make these tapestries faster. And so the Luddites said, hey, this is going to take away all our jobs. And they went and burned these things down. Okay, so this has been going on since the beginning of time. The candle makers were mad at the light bulb, and the buggy makers were mad at the car. And yes, every single new technology disrupts the old way. Kodak was mad at digital cameras, right? So yes, this is exactly what happens. Now, in the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s, you saw at that time we had just the farm industry and the cottage industry, and all of a sudden we had machines that could do the work of 5,000 men. But what are these 5,000 men gonna do? Well, it turns out they do higher value things like science and medicine. Right? Amazing, right? So what happens is, yes, it displaces some workers, but what it does is it takes away lower value tasks so we can go work on higher value tasks. So it happens over and over and over, and it's going to continue to happen over and over. And it should, because as humans, I believe I wrote a book called The Uncommonist Manifesto. And in The Uncommonist Manifesto, when I really made the case, me and my partner, my co-author, Alex Fetsky, who's another Aussie, we really stood for capitalism. We talked about it being a natural and emergent process. So we as humans have private property. We have our thoughts, we have our ingenuity, we have our creativity, we have our scarce resources, our time, and we use those to increase efficiency, to use our scarce resources more efficient, and we do that through trade and things like that. And so part of that is using those skills in order to learn these higher value skills that we can have. But what happens is over time, we do want to be more efficient. So we want to be working less. So we need these technologies to offset that. But here's the problem. Here's the rub. You mentioned earlier when you talked about these people not being able to get ahead or worried that they're not getting ahead, they're burning the candle at both ends. These people don't want to learn new skills. So that's the problem. Now, I heard a story here in the United States, up in Oregon is like a big logging town. And there's like this logging town up in the mountains, and the logging's moved away. We're not deforesting anymore. And so all these people are stuck in this town that there's nothing to do anymore because there's no logging anymore. And so now the government's paying them, giving them welfare because there's nothing for them to do. And it's like, dude, you can learn a new skill and move to another town. Like people do it all the time, right? So I think there's a couple of interesting things at play. One, yes, history shows us that this is what happens. Technology disrupts, it gets rid of lower value tasks, and we go work on higher value tasks. That's what happens. The problem that we have is that while that's the way human nature, capitalism, and technology works, we have another force that's opposing that. And the opposing force to that is the fiat money system. Okay. So what happens is with technology, things get faster, easier, cheaper, but the fiat money system does the opposite. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a cup of coffee. In 1970, a cup of coffee was like 10 cents. Today, a cup of coffee is like $4. Now, don't you think with all the technology and all the supply chains and everything we have, it's easier, faster, and cheaper to get the coffee bean from wherever Colombia to my cup today? The cup of coffee should have gone from 10 cents to 1 cent. not 10 cents to $4. And the reason why that's important to understand is that our quality of life should be getting easier. With technology, we should be working less. So I should have a robot cleaning my house. That saves me a couple hours a week, right? I have all these technologies should be saving me time. I should be working less, 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 and less to have the same quality of life. But because the fiat money system steals our value, I have to work harder. And so we have these two forces: technology, this deflationary force of technology that should be making our lives easier, cheaper. But then we have this inflationary system that's stealing from that productivity at the same time. And so those two things are coming into play. And then the other third thing that the fiat money system does as well is it sort of incentivizes these people to not learn a new skill. Right. So I'm sure you've seen in Australia down here, and, you know, we have these national parks and they have these signs that say, like, don't feed the animals because the animals become dependent on you. And so, you know, if you take a lion and you raise it in captivity, you can't, if it was born in captivity, raised in captivity, you can't just go let it go in the jungle. Like, it doesn't know how to survive. And so humans, when we're born onto a welfare system and the government just gives us everything, we don't know how to survive either. But the difference is we're not animals. The difference is we're humans. We're smarter. So, as my dad would tell my mom when I didn't want to eat my vegetables when I was a kid, my dad would say, if he's hungry enough, he's going to eat. Right. And so if we're humans, we're smarter. We're not animals. If we're hungry enough, we're going to go work. Right. If we're hungry enough, we're going to go learn a new skill. But the problem is when the fiat money system incentivizes us to continue to do nothing because the government is now paying us to do nothing. I don't know how it is in Australia, but in the United States,
It's exactly the same.
we have this massive welfare system. We're literally paying teenage girls to have babies. Literally. That's not what the program was there for. It was good intentions. Like, hey, if they have teen pregnancies, we'll help them so they can still go to school. So we'll give them money, they get their apartment. But now girls are like, well, shoot, I'll just have 5 babies and stay at home because they're going to give me a bunch of money. And so we're literally paying people to not work. We're literally paying people to have babies out of wedlock. And so then that incentivizes people to not change with the times. And so then it becomes a very big problem. So the technology curve that we've seen throughout history is and will remain the same. It'll continue to, people will lose their jobs. And that should be okay. It's been okay all throughout history. It's always worked. But now we're in the situation with the fiat money system where it's causing a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Well, just so you know, like, Australia is exactly the same. The last couple of years has proven to everyone that as soon as they handed out the stimulus money during the COVID lockdowns and things like that, people were like, yeah, this is sweet. I'll just stay at home. Everyone's welfare doubled during that time. People got paid more money. Like, at the time, I had a business where I had 28 casual employees. And so the government was paying them more to stay home than what I was to do a couple of shifts a week. So they were very much incentivized to stay home and do nothing. And I think that bred this indoctrination or kind of training ground to kind of be, I don't know, fat, sick, and lazy, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what their perspective on life for most of them are, but I can definitely see that there's a shortage of labor here in Australia. I don't know what it's like in the US, but right here in Australia, people are struggling to find good employees. And it just seems, I don't know, like, mind-boggling to think that 3 years ago, people were employing people left, right, and center, and people were searching for jobs. But nowadays, people are screaming out for good talent and not finding anything. I'm seeing businesses that are closing early because or taking less people in their restaurants because they just can't survive. Well, they can't service the amount of people, and they can't pay the wages either. So there's definitely a huge threat that's going on in terms of people's dependency on the government to rely on them. And so this universal income and all this speak about all this kind of crap is definitely something I want to talk to. So in your mind, apart from that the fiat currency, which is obviously a looming factor which is going to impact a lot of people going forward, what are other threats to society and to our current economic climate do you think are looming in the background that perhaps the government's not telling us or people aren't researching into enough? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, other threats. I mean, there's no shortage of threats out there for sure. I think the underpinning all of those threats is the fiat money system because it enables all these things. But I think the biggest threat that we're all facing is loss of freedom. I mean, that's the threat that the whole world is facing, right? Where there's this massive shift globally towards massive globalization. You know, one world government. I don't want to say globalization, globalism. And this one world government and the BIS at the top and the IMF and the UN and the World Economic Forum and all those things. And now we're starting to see some of that this sort of breaking apart, this globalism. So now like Russia's over here and China's over here, and we have the rise of the global BRICS, but it doesn't change the fact that every nation wants more and more control over their people. And there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, obviously, for one, some people are just power hungry and they just want that. But two, what happens is these governments, a goal of a business is to grow your business. Murray Rothbard wrote a book called The Anatomy of the State, which is an amazing book. I recommend everybody to read it. It's like a booklet. You can read it in about an hour or two, Anatomy of the State. But he talks about what the state is and what the state isn't. And the goal of the state is to continue to grow and continue to maintain power. And so the problem is as the state continues to grow, and again, I'm not sure how it's in Australia, but the level of corruption in government in the United States is so blatant that it's not even being tried. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. It's just like in your face. So what are you going to do about it? And as this level of corruption continues, and as things continue to get worse, and as the standard of living continues to go down in every nation around the world, the people just aren't happy about it. And so as the people aren't happy about it, and as we have tools now to talk about this with the internet and things like that, it causes a lot of disruption. And the only way a government can stay in power is by controlling the narrative. We look back in the 1500s, you had the church and state that basically controlled everything. And about 70 years earlier, a piece of technology was invented called the printing press. And the printing press printed Bibles. And people got the Bible and said, wait a minute, this isn't what you've been telling us. You've been lying to us this whole time. And anybody who read that and said that was labeled a heretic and they were killed. But it didn't change the fact because the information was out there. And today, we all have the information. And so if these central planners, if these government officials cannot control the narrative, then they'll lose power. So we're starting to see this trend where they need to maintain power any way they can, and that's through censorship, censoring our ability to communicate, censoring our ability to transact, and even censoring our ability to travel. Right. And so if they can keep us in place, if they can know exactly what we're using our money for, if they can prevent us from saying certain things, then maybe they have a chance of maintaining their grasp on power. Maybe. And so that's the greatest threat that we're facing. It's not just one, it's multiple, but it's a threat to, I think, so the biggest threat, in my opinion, is censorship. That's sort of what I'm saying. It's censorship, but censoring what? And I kind of labeled the three: communication, payments, and travel. But ultimately, it's censorship. I think censorship of speech is first and foremost. First and foremost, there's a all-out global assault on this, and then censorship of our payments is certainly coming along with that.
Mm. So in Australia, just so you know, there's no difference between what you're saying is happening in the US to what's happening in Australia. The level of corruption in our governments is outstanding. It's just like, and like you said, it's just brazen. I mean, like, they're not even hiding it. They're doing deals. They're getting found out. And the thing that pisses the public off the most is that there's no justice being served to these people. It's almost like they can get away with anything. And I'm watching what's happening overseas with the Biden family and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, man, how obvious it has to get when 10% goes to the big guy and this guy's still in office. Trump gets impeached for something he did 15 years ago. So it's a very upside down kind of world at the moment. I think people are getting more and more upset about it. And I think there is a looming challenge ahead where it's just going to reach a precipice where people are going to be, they're going to be fed up and they're just not going to take it anymore. So I like I'm optimistic that there's something going on in the future, which I think is going to be beneficial for all of us, in mankind as a whole. But you touched on one thing, which is this sort of control over money. And I think people in Australia are shitting themselves because they know that they're losing their cash. Their money is getting devalued by the day. The cost of living is rising. At the moment, I think we're paying somewhere around $2.20 a litre for up to $2.40 a litre at the Bowser for fuel. The cost of goods are going up. Like everything is rising at a large rate. I'm not sure what interest rates are like in the US at the moment, but we're paying somewhere around 6%, just under 6%. In terms of our interest rates, and then if you want to get a commercial loan, it might be eight
For
or
what?
nine percent.
For a home?
Yeah, for a home, for a residential
We're
home.
we're up to 8% in the US
Yeah,
right now.
wow. Okay. Well, I think that we're going to slowly follow. And like I said, these factors of our cash or the value of our money, what it buys is going down. The cost of living is going up. Our wages are stagnating. And I think that, well, they have been for quite some time. So, and then we've got this looming digital currency. And I think what Australians and probably the US and the world alike are worried about is having no option but to have these CBDCs and to have our money tracked and have these wallets. And now there's a huge, not only technical shift, but a monetary shift. So in terms of these digital currencies like Bitcoin, or whether we're talking about any kind of cryptocurrency, where do you see that going? Have you got I mean, my crystal ball doesn't work, but have you got a timeline of like how things are going to project over the next couple of years? How quickly is that going to rush in, and what can we do to kind of mitigate some of this stress and pressure and turmoil in the meantime?
Yeah, unfortunately, as humans, as I kind of talked about earlier with this pendulum swinging, like we take things too far. And unfortunately, humans, as I said, we're not animals, but we are similar to animals in a sense where we're really motivated by two things, and that's rushing towards pleasure and moving from pain, the carrot and the stick, just like an animal. And so, unfortunately, typically for most of us, the pain has to get high enough. You have a friend who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, and you see that, and they need to get help, they need to get rehab, but they don't see the pain. It's not high enough. They have to hit that rock bottom first, kind of a thing, right? And so, for most of us in the developed world, and this would be the U.S., Canada, Australia, Europe, et cetera, like our money's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, we can see how bad it is, but it's still pretty good. And so for most of us, we don't see this big need as to like, why do we need Bitcoin? If you're in Argentina, Lebanon, Turkey, Venezuela, where your currency is literally melting down, burning down, you don't need to be told why you need a different form of money. You already know. If you're in North Korea or Afghanistan, like you already know you need something else as money. And so, I think that's sort of the problem, is that it's starting to see massive adoption there, but in the US and the developed world, it's still sort of this slow roll, if you will. However, what do we really need Bitcoin for? Well, one, all solutions are supposed to come to problems. And so some of the problems that we have is this endless money printing. So to your point with the high price of gas and the rates and all this is in effect, this inflation is in effect because of all the money printing that's happened over the last 50 years. And so this endless amount of money creation not just leads to massive inflation, which is a problem for us, obviously, but it also leads to endless wars, like the ones going off in the Middle East right now, the one that's still going on between Russia and Ukraine, and the one that's potentially going to start happening over in China and the South Pacific. And so it leads to these endless wars. So that's a problem. And so if we went a way to solve that would be to have a fixed money supply. Another problem is that we're starting to see, as I said, I think the big problem is censorship. Now, in some of these countries like North Korea, the amount of censorship in financial transactions, or in Afghanistan, the Taliban has control of the banks, is extremely high. But even the United States is extremely high. If you send a wire, I mean, every single time they want to know, where's the wire going? Why are you sending the wire? These things. And so the amount of censorship being done in a financial transaction is happening. So then we would want something that's censorship resistant, right? And so Bitcoin is the answer to most of these problems, but most of us haven't really felt most of these problems bad enough yet. But where does this go? Sort of this crystal ball sort of a thing. I just ask a very simple question. Do you think there's a world, or what are the odds, that the governments all of a sudden go, we should not print all this money. As a matter of fact, we should pay all our debt off and we should live within a budget. Like, it's pretty much not going to happen. So will the governments print more money or less money in the future? More. Okay. So we're going to need Bitcoin more and more. Then I would say, do you think the governments wake up one day and say that they should give us back all our freedoms and they should shrink the size of the government? Or do you think the governments get more authoritarian? And of course, I think the answer is they get more authoritarian. So those will continue to push the demand. So it's not like where a lot of people think, Mark, when's hyper Bitcoinization? It's not that there's an event. It's a process. And so we're going through that process. When the dollar took over the reserve standard of the pound sterling, that was about a 30 to 40 year process.
Mm.
And so we're seeing the process happening. Now, I guess the US dollar could get rid of Bitcoin overnight if they wanted. All they would have to do is those things that I said, which is pay off the debt, go back to a balanced budget, stop censoring transactions. But that's not going to happen. And so the demand will just continue to grow. They're going to print more money. We're going to want something to protect us from that. They're going to try to censor us more. We're going to need something to protect us from that. And so we'll continue to see this trend grow. I think, part of what we're seeing now is a big narrative shift. So very, 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 very big that most people haven't realized is gold is diverging from real rates. So if you look at a chart, you'll see gold moves lockstep with real rates. Real rates is basically inflation. It's the amount that the government pays minus what the inflation is. And so you see gold since the last couple of decades moves literally in lockstep with it. And now it's broken out. Why is that? Because the world, not just people like in the United States, but the world, the BRICS nations and China just dumped like more treasuries than they have since like 2009, and they're buying gold. The BRICS nations, they're buying gold. The people are buying gold. And so they're starting to see this divergence, but they're also buying Bitcoin as well. Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, was just on the news saying that people are moving to Bitcoin as a flight to safety. So the whole world is waking up to this. The whole world is realizing that the United States government is not going to quit printing. Neither is the Central Bank of Australia or Canada or China or fill in the blank. And so the world is starting to realize they need other assets. Now, again, the whole world doesn't just wake up tomorrow knowing that, but slowly but surely they do. But I think it's also sort of this slowly then gradually then suddenly. So Ludwig von Mises, arguably the father of the Austrian School of Economics, called it the crack up boom. And he said, and then suddenly people realize that inflation is both permanent and intentional. In the United States, the Fed tried to tell us it was transitory. It's a little anomaly. It's here, but it's going to go away. But Mises says when people wake up and realize it's both permanent and intentional, then they'll no longer want to hold it. And he said then suddenly, that's the open part, they'll no longer want to hold the currency and they'll want to buy whatever assets they can. So at a point right now where it looks like the market should be breaking down, oh my gosh, mortgage rates are up to 8%, the real estate market has to crash, stock markets have to crash, but they're not. They're not. Real estate's not crashing. Stocks are not crashing. Gold, Bitcoin is not crashing. But it should. Everyone said it has to, but it's not. Why? And I think part of that is because people are waking up to the fact that inflation is both permanent and intentional. And they no longer want to hold the currency. China doesn't want to hold the currency. The BRICS don't want to hold the currency. Russia can't hold the currency. And people are waking up to the fact that they don't want as well. So it's a process. That's the gradually then suddenly. I think, what I expect is just adoption continues going up at a faster and faster rate. The price of Bitcoin continues going up at a faster and faster rate. I think this cycle holds relatively true in past previous cycles. And we're starting to see where it's really needed in these developing markets because of authoritarian regimes and double to triple digit inflation. It continues to grow as well. And in the next, by the end of the decade, it's going to be widely used and it's just going to continue to grow from there.
Yeah, right. The end of the decade, do you think?
Into the decade, what, right? So it's like, at what point are we looking for? Like, what do you think? What point are you calling, into the decade? What?
Yeah, I hear you. I think that, and that's kind of like this open-ended question as to when things are coming. What I like about your messaging is that there are things that you can do right now that can prepare you for the future as to when and whatever.
But when you said when things are coming, but what's coming? Like what event or what are the things?
So the point that I was making was this central digital currency. So I think that what's happening here in Australia, and I don't know what you can comment what it's like in the US, that we've got banks now like the ANZ, for example, which are closing down branches. They're not accepting cash deposits. They're not allowing you to withdraw large sums of cash at any one time. But then at the same time, there are some banks which are critical. They're stopping certain transactions when you go to buy digital currency. So when you're trading money from your NAB account or your ANZ account through to a wallet, they're stopping those transactions. So there seems to be some resistance and all that. And I think what a large portion of my audience are looking to is saying, hey, listen, we want to earn as much cash as we possibly can. But what we're also facing is this sort of pushback on how much cash we can actually use in the economy. And then there's the main big four banks in Australia here, the Commonwealth Bank, the NAB, ANZ, those types of banks there, and Westpac, they're all moving towards a central digital currency. And so this scares the hell out of people because they're just like, I don't want to lose control of my money. And I think that's really the main point that I was trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the same things in the United States. So lots of banks are stopping transactions to go to cryptocurrency exchanges and things like that. So we're certainly seeing that. At the end of every nation or empire is the last stage, which is capital control laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the situation that we're going into, we need massive inflation. We talked about this. The only way the government can get the debt to GDP back down, well, not the only way, but the most probable way is to inflate the GDP, right? So the debt to GDP is a ratio. You can either pay the debt down or you can increase the GDP. Well, if I increase inflation, the GDP goes up. But if I increase the inflation so high to do that and I keep bond yields down, it's called financial repression. If I do that, which is most likely what's going to happen, happened in the 1940s in the United States, happened in the 80s in Israel, and it's going to happen again. If I do that, then capital tries to leave. They're going to go buy Bitcoin. They're going to go buy gold. They're going to go buy real estate. So then the government has to stop that, right? So they want high inflation, low bond yields, financial repression, and then they have to seal off the exit so money doesn't leave. And so that's just the part that you're talking about. And that will continue. You're absolutely right. That will continue. They have to. It's the only way. Now, as far as CBDCs, we're starting to see it happening differently around the world. Something I've talked about quite considerably. Knowing that the governments need the control, every government wants it. And it's not just like this globalist view. Like I said, you see Russia trying to breaking off. Russia is like apparently fighting against the globalists, it looks like, but yet they're working on their own CBDC as well. Right. So every nation's going to want this, and it's going to be very dystopian. It's the final piece that's needed to really put the clamp down. And in my opinion, if we get this social credit score system like China has with a CBDC on top, it's the final piece they need to potentially break this cycle of revolution, freedom, and oppression. And potentially we end up in this matrix type world that we never break out of. And so it's very scary and dangerous. In the United States specifically, there's a lot of pushback against this. And while our government is massively corrupt, as you've already highlighted and we've talked about, we still have 50 independent states. I think half a dozen states or maybe almost a dozen states now have actually filed lawsuits and passed laws that CBDCs aren't allowed. We still have some sort of voting progress, right? And we also have the reserve currency of the world. So I don't think the U.S. will be the first one to do it. If anything, it'll probably be the last. But certainly, of course, China, the communist nation, did it first. And we're starting to see that the ECB is now rushing one through. Just last week, they announced that they're moving into the next stage of their pilot. So the ECB, the European Union, will obviously most likely push one through pretty quickly. Russia's working on one. So we'll start to see them popping up more and more and more. But I think the US dollar will be one of the last ones to do it. It's the reserve currency of the world. We don't need it. In addition, a lot of these nations, at least they're saying so, I don't know if they believe it, but they say part of the reason why people are moving to Bitcoin is people want digital money. So let's give them digital money. And to be honest, man, almost 90% of dollar transactions are done digitally anyway.
Sure.
I don't want this to happen. I understand how dangerous this is, but the reality is I don't really use cash anymore. I use my debit card, I use my credit card, I do wire transfers, I do like whatever, right? So
yeah, Mark, I don't think that's the real concern for people. I mean, up until recently, I was the same. I'm like, you open up your wallet and all you got is receipts in there. You're like, I've got 3 kids. I don't have cash that's just lying around all the time. I don't walk around with $1,000 in my wallet. So
yeah.
I agree with you. I think the threat that you've already spoken to a number of times is the control of, like you've always said, control of information, control of where you go, and control of how you spend your money. And that is the deepest threat that I think everyone's really worried about when we move to whatever digital currency comes along. I think people are going to be fearful that they're going to be railroaded into one particular currency that their country is pushing forward, and that
they are. And I always say that without the freedom to transact, there's no freedom, and that really underpins everything. So in the United States, our Constitution says we have the freedom to assemble. We have the freedom of speech. That's guaranteed to us. But if I can't pay to put gas in my truck to go to the assembly, how do I assemble?
Mm.
If I can't pay to get food when I go there, how do I assemble? Right. So it really underpins all of that. What I would say, though, to maybe ease some people's minds, after I already said I think it's the last piece they need to like have total control over us. What I would say, though, to ease some people's minds is that the government doesn't tell us what's money. We decide what money is. And what do I mean by that? Hey, you know, will you let me get this thing from you? Will you take my iPhone? Well, my iPhone becomes a medium. Money's a medium of exchange. So maybe my iPhone becomes this medium of exchange. I trade you for my iPhone. Hey, how about if I come to your house and do your yard work for the day? Now my labor becomes a medium of exchange, right? So we decide what money is. We decide what we want to use as a medium of exchange. We see it many times throughout the world where you see a currency collapse, or even in the United States, we have like a big storm. No one gets supplies there for a couple of days. They're trading batteries for water. They're not using dollars, right? Because at the end of the day, what people don't understand is that, well, people haven't really thought through, is that we don't want money. We want the things that money buys us. Money is just that medium of exchange that gets us that. So what I want is the water or the batteries. And so the reason why I say that is you look at like Venezuela, for example. People say, well, it's backed by the military. Well, Venezuela's got a military and the money just lays in the street. Nobody even bothers to pick it up. Nobody wants the money. They would rather trade in goods and services. So the government can certainly say, here's the CBDC, all cash is gone. They can certainly say that. All the cash is gone. You can only use the CBDC. Okay, well, I can't exchange my labor. I can't trade you my iPhone. I can't, whatever, right? So we decide what money is, not the government. And I think that's sort of in the back pocket what sort of gives me some hope here.
Yeah, I love that. Mark, thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate your optimism. I think a lot of people should be taking away from this that there are options. And I think if you start to think outside the square, like you articulated before as you were growing up, I think that there is optimism in everyone's minds and hearts, and there is a brighter future. Although, like you said, and I tend to agree that there's people are going to go through a bit more pain before they feel like there's a sense of urgency around all of this. So I appreciate your sentiment on all these things. You're one of the fastest talking Americans I've ever interviewed, by the way.
I listen to everything on 2x speeds. It's got me started talking
Yeah, I'm the
fast.
same. I'm about 1.5. I've got a little bit of catching up to do. So yeah, so it's been a really entertaining chat, which I really like. If people want to find out more about you, look at your courses, look at your content, where do they go?
Yeah, the best way is just go to my website, One Mark Moss. It's just the number one, onemarkmoss.com. Everything's linked there, all my social media handles. Otherwise, I'm on YouTube all over the place. Just search Mark Moss on YouTube and you'll find me there as well.
Brilliant. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.